Some people survived wars, disasters, and impossible odds, then lost to their own decisions. Fact 1. Most people know the story of Harry Houdini, the legendary escape artist who survived underwater traps, locked safes, and death-defying stunts that terrified audiences around the world. Ironically, the trick that finally killed him wasn't part of a performance at all. In 1926, while resting backstage in Montreal, a college student asked whether it was true that Houdini could withstand powerful punches to the stomach. Before Houdini had time to prepare or tighten his muscles, the student suddenly struck him several times. Houdini continued performing despite increasing pain, refusing medical treatment until it was far too late. His appendix had ruptured, leading to fatal peritonitis days later. Historians still debate whether the punches directly caused the rupture, but they unquestionably worsened his condition. The man who spent decades escaping impossible situations ultimately couldn't escape his own determination to ignore unbearable pain. Fact 2. In 1998, 43-year-old attorney Clement Vallandigham became part of one of history's strangest courtroom tragedies. While defending a client accused of murder, he argued that the victim had accidentally shot himself while drawing a pistol from his pocket. To prove his theory to the jury, Vallandigham grabbed a similar revolver he believed was unloaded. Confidently reenacting the supposed accident, he slipped the gun into his pocket, attempted to draw it, and pulled the trigger. The weapon discharged instantly, firing directly into his abdomen. He died the following day from the wound. The bizarre twist is that his demonstration actually convinced the jury his client was innocent because it proved the shooting could indeed happen accidentally. It's one of the few cases where a lawyer won the argument but paid the ultimate price for presenting his evidence a little too enthusiastically. Fact 3. The Austrian tailor Franz Reichelt dreamed of becoming famous as the inventor of a wearable parachute. Convinced his design would revolutionize aviation, he spent years developing a suit that he believed could safely slow a person's fall. In 1912, after receiving permission to conduct what officials assumed would be a dummy test from the Eiffel Tower, Reichelt unexpectedly announced he would jump himself. Friends, journalists, and even police officers urged him to reconsider, but he insisted complete confidence was necessary to prove the invention worked. Standing atop the tower, he hesitated briefly before stepping into history for all the wrong reasons. The parachute failed to deploy properly, and he fell to his death in front of horrified witnesses. Sometimes the difference between confidence and catastrophic overconfidence is measured in just a few unforgettable seconds. Fact 4. In 1993, accomplished lawyer Gary Hoy wanted to impress a group of visiting law students inside Toronto's Toronto Dominion Centre. He often demonstrated how incredibly strong the building's windows were by throwing his full weight against the thick glass. The windows were famous for resisting enormous force, and previous demonstrations had always ended with Hoy bouncing harmlessly backward while the audience applauded. That afternoon, he sprinted toward the window exactly as he had done many times before. The glass itself did not shatter. Instead, the entire window frame gave way under the impact, sending Hoy through the opening from the 24th floor. He fell to his death in front of stunned students who had expected another entertaining demonstration. His confidence in the engineering wasn't entirely misplaced. The glass survived. The frame holding it did not, making this one of history's most tragic lessons in overlooked details. Fact 5. In 1982, Turkish daredevil Yilmaz Dural became convinced he could imitate the growing popularity of homemade human flight experiments. Inspired by birds and early aviation pioneers, he constructed a pair of large homemade wings using lightweight materials and climbed onto the roof of a 6-story apartment building. Friends gathered below expecting an unforgettable spectacle, while others desperately tried convincing him to abandon the attempt. Dural insisted he had carefully calculated everything and believed the wings would generate enough lift to carry him safely across the street. Moments after jumping, the crude apparatus folded almost immediately under the air pressure, providing virtually no lift at all. He struck the ground with fatal injuries before emergency responders could help. His dream was rooted in fascination with flight rather than recklessness alone, but physics remained completely indifferent to confidence, ambition, and optimistic calculations made without real aerodynamic testing. Fact 6. Alexander Bogdanov was a respected Russian physician, philosopher, and scientist who believed blood transfusions could dramatically slow aging and extend human life. During the 1920s, he personally underwent numerous transfusions and claimed they improved his eyesight, energy, and overall health. Encouraged by these results, Bogdanov continued experimenting on himself, convinced he was opening the door to a medical breakthrough. In 1928, he received blood from a young university student who appeared perfectly healthy. Unfortunately, the donor was unknowingly suffering from both malaria and tuberculosis. Within days, Bogdanov developed severe complications caused by the infected blood and died shortly afterward. Some historians believe incompatible blood types may also have contributed to the fatal reaction. Ironically, a man dedicated to discovering a way for people to live longer lost his own life while voluntarily participating in the very experiment he believed would defeat aging itself. Fact 7. In 1967, amateur treasure hunter Peter Berg believed he had discovered an unexploded World War II artillery shell buried near an old military training area. Instead of immediately contacting authorities, he decided to clean the rusty object and determine exactly what he had found. Friends later recalled that he treated the shell almost like an interesting historical souvenir rather than a dangerous explosive. Hoping to remove years of corrosion, Berg began striking it repeatedly with a hammer inside his workshop. The shell was still fully armed despite decades underground. A powerful explosion instantly destroyed the workspace and killed him before anyone nearby understood what had happened. Bomb disposal experts later confirmed the shell could have been safely removed if professionals had been called first. Curiosity may drive remarkable discoveries, but curiosity combined with military explosives has an extraordinarily poor historical success rate. Fact 8. In 1981, experienced wildlife enthusiast Mark Hoffman ignored repeated warnings while photographing a large captive polar bear during what was supposed to be a controlled visit. The animal had appeared calm for hours, encouraging Hoffman to move progressively closer in search of the perfect photograph. Believing the bear had become comfortable with his presence, he crossed a safety barrier designed specifically to protect visitors from sudden attacks. Witnesses later described the change as almost instantaneous. The bear shifted from relaxed curiosity to full predatory aggression within seconds, giving Hoffman no realistic chance to escape. He died from the attack before handlers could intervene. Experts later explained that polar bears remain powerful apex predators, regardless of how calm they appear in captivity. The tragedy became another sobering reminder that wild instincts never disappear simply because an animal has spent years behind fences or seems comfortable around humans. Fact 9. In 1978, California resident Robert Williams decided to solve a frustrating problem himself. His home's chimney had become blocked, and instead of hiring a professional sweep, he climbed onto the roof carrying a heavy steel chain weighted with a large concrete block. His plan seemed simple enough. Lower the chain through the chimney, break apart whatever was causing the blockage, then pull everything back out. Unfortunately, the concrete weight became firmly wedged halfway down the flue. Rather than accepting defeat, Williams wrapped the chain around his waist and pulled with all his strength while standing near the roof's edge. The obstruction suddenly gave way without warning. The massive concrete block shot downward inside the chimney while the chain violently yanked Williams forward, pulling him off the roof. He fell several stories and suffered fatal injuries. A routine household repair turned deadly because persistence replaced caution at exactly the wrong moment. Fact 10. In 1989, experienced beekeeper John Mitchell had worked around honeybees for years and rarely wore full protective equipment. His confidence came from thousands of uneventful encounters, convincing him that calm behavior was usually enough to prevent aggressive swarms. While relocating several hives during unusually hot weather, Mitchell decided to skip his protective veil because the task was expected to take only a few minutes. As he lifted one hive, it slipped unexpectedly and crashed onto the ground, releasing thousands of highly agitated bees at once. He was stung hundreds of times within moments. Although many people survive massive bee attacks, Mitchell suffered a severe allergic reaction that progressed with terrifying speed before emergency responders could stabilize him. He died shortly afterward. The tragedy highlighted a painful reality familiar to safety experts everywhere. The accident that changes everything is often the one occurring during the task you've completed successfully hundreds of times before. Fact 11. In 1999, an experienced amateur mechanic named David Grundman believed he could safely inspect a fuel leak beneath his pickup truck without completely draining the gasoline tank. After raising the vehicle with a jack inside his garage, he crawled underneath carrying an ordinary incandescent trouble light. Unlike modern LED work lights, older incandescent bulbs became extremely hot during use and could easily shatter if struck. While repositioning himself, Grumman accidentally knocked the lamp against the truck's metal frame. The glass bulb instantly broke, exposing the glowing filament directly beside gasoline vapors that had accumulated beneath the vehicle. The fumes ignited in a violent flash, triggering a fire that quickly spread through the garage. Despite rescue efforts by neighbors, Grumman suffered fatal burns. His story remains a sobering reminder that gasoline itself is rarely the greatest danger. Invisible vapor mixed with a tiny ignition source can become catastrophically explosive. Fact 12. In 1923, jockey Frank Hayes achieved one of horse racing's most astonishing victories under circumstances nobody could have imagined. Hayes, who worked primarily as a stable hand, was finally given a rare opportunity to compete in an official race. Riding a horse appropriately named Sweet Kiss, he maintained a steady position throughout the event and crossed the finish line ahead of every competitor. Spectators celebrated what appeared to be an inspiring underdog triumph. Only after the race ended did officials discover something deeply unsettling. Hayes had suffered a fatal heart attack sometime during the competition, likely brought on by the physical strain of making weight and racing. His body had remained upright in the saddle because the horse continued running steadily until the finish. As extraordinary as it sounds, Hayes was officially declared the winner, making him the only jockey in history to win a race after dying before reaching the finish line. Fact 13. In 1974, German engineer Carl Wilhelm believed he had designed an innovative homemade diving bell capable of allowing longer underwater exploration in a nearby lake. Having successfully tested the device in shallow water several times, he became increasingly confident that it could safely operate at greater depths. During a deeper dive, however, he descended farther than his equipment had ever been tested. As water pressure increased, the improvised air system began malfunctioning, allowing carbon dioxide to accumulate inside the chamber while reducing the available oxygen. Witnesses on the surface initially assumed everything was proceeding normally because the guidelines remained steady. By the time they realized something was wrong and recovered the diving bell, Wilhelm had already succumbed to asphyxiation. Investigators later concluded that his engineering skills were genuine, but even brilliant designs can become deadly when tested beyond their proven limits without redundant safety systems or rescue support. Fact 14. In 1984, experienced pilot Larry Walters became convinced he could fulfill a lifelong dream of flying without spending years earning a traditional pilot's license. Instead, he tied 45 large weather balloons filled with helium to an ordinary lawn chair, packed sandwiches, soft drinks, a CB radio, and a pellet gun to pop balloons when it was time to descend. His original plan was to float only a few hundred feet above his California neighborhood. The moment the tether lines were released, however, the chair rocketed skyward to nearly 16,000 feet, drifting directly into controlled airspace where startled airline crews reported seeing a man relaxing in a lawn chair among the clouds. After several hours, Walters finally began descending but became tangled in power lines before crashing. He survived the flight itself, but later struggled deeply with the aftermath. The bizarre adventure became legendary, proving optimism can sometimes climb far higher than preparation. Fact 15. In 1996, experienced cave explorer Neil Moss joined a team exploring a notoriously narrow section of Peak Cavern in England. Determined to push slightly farther than previous expeditions, he squeezed headfirst into an extremely tight vertical passage barely wider than his shoulders. At first, progress seemed steady, but the tunnel gradually narrowed until his chest became firmly wedged between the rock walls. Every attempt to move only trapped him more securely. Rescue teams worked tirelessly for hours, removing rock and constructing elaborate pulley systems in hopes of pulling him free. Unfortunately, the confined position placed enormous pressure on his lungs and circulatory system, making breathing increasingly difficult. Despite extraordinary rescue efforts involving dozens of volunteers, Moss died before they could reach him. His tragic fate permanently changed cave rescue procedures and remains one of the most haunting examples of how a few extra inches of curiosity can become an irreversible mistake. Fact 16. In 1983, renowned stunt performer Carol Susek had already survived an astonishing journey over Niagara Falls inside a specially designed barrel. That incredible success convinced him he could safely perform an even more ambitious indoor stunt before a paying audience in Houston. His plan involved dropping from the roof of a stadium inside another reinforced barrel and landing precisely in a water tank positioned below. thousands of spectators gathered, expecting another spectacular triumph. As the barrel fell, however, it struck the edge of the tank instead of entering cleanly. The violent impact shattered much of the protective structure designed to absorb the landing. Sutek suffered catastrophic injuries and died shortly afterward despite immediate medical attention. The heartbreaking irony was impossible to ignore. He had conquered one of North America's most dangerous natural wonders, only to lose his life attempting a carefully planned demonstration inside a building that appeared infinitely safer than Niagara Falls. Fact 17. In 1979, veteran electrician Thomas Avery believed a neighborhood transformer had already been completely disconnected before maintenance work began. Utility crews had followed standard procedures countless times, and everyone involved assumed the equipment was safe to handle. Wanting to finish quickly before bad weather arrived, Avery skipped one final voltage test that company policy required before touching the exposed components. Unknown to him, electricity was still feeding the transformer through an alternate circuit that had not been isolated correctly. The moment his tools contacted the wiring, a powerful electrical arc erupted without warning. Co-workers rushed to help, but the injuries were immediately life-threatening, and he died shortly afterward. Investigators later emphasized that the missing safety check required less than a minute to perform. The tragedy became a powerful training example across the industry because it demonstrated how dangerous familiarity can become when routine slowly replaces verification. Fact 18. In 1994, veteran mountain climber Derek Hersey had earned international respect for completing extraordinarily difficult ascents without ropes, believing absolute concentration and experience offered greater freedom than traditional protection. During an attempt on Yosemite National Park's famous Sentinel Rock, he chose to free solo a route he had successfully climbed before. Witnesses later recalled watching him move confidently across sections that intimidated even highly skilled climbers. Near the upper portion of the route, however, one small handhold unexpectedly broke away beneath his weight. Without ropes, harnesses, or any backup system, there was no opportunity to recover from the mistake or arrest the fall. He plunged hundreds of feet and died instantly. Fellow climbers later described the accident as a sobering reminder that mastery never eliminates uncertainty. Even decades of exceptional skill cannot guarantee survival when every move depends entirely upon a single piece of rock remaining exactly where nature placed it. Fact 19. In 1927, legendary dancer Isadora Duncan was riding through the French Riviera in an open sports car, celebrating life with her signature elegance and dramatic fashion. She wore one of her favorite accessories, an exceptionally long silk scarf draped loosely around her neck. As the automobile accelerated away from the curb, the flowing scarf slipped over the side of the vehicle and became caught in the exposed rear wheel and axle. Within a fraction of a second, the fabric tightened with tremendous force, violently pulling Duncan backward before anyone could react. She suffered a fatal neck injury almost instantly. Witnesses were left stunned by how something so graceful had become lethally dangerous in an instant. Her death became one of history's most famous examples of an everyday object turning deadly through an unimaginably unlucky sequence of events, forever changing conversations about clothing safety around moving machinery. Fact 20. In 1995, experienced treasure diver Chris Lemons joined friends exploring a decades-old shipwreck resting far below the surface. The wreck itself presented no unusual danger for divers with proper training, but visibility was poor, and countless abandoned fishing nets surrounded the aging structure. While swimming through a narrow section to photograph artifacts, Lemons accidentally brushed against one of the nearly invisible nylon nets. Within seconds, his tank, fins, and equipment became hopelessly entangled. Every movement only tightened the mesh around him. His companions immediately attempted to free him, but cutting the net underwater proved painfully slow while his air supply steadily diminished. Despite desperate rescue efforts, they were unable to release him before he exhausted his breathing gas. Investigators later noted that abandoned fishing gear has claimed countless experienced divers worldwide, earning its chilling nickname among professionals, the ghost nets that never stop hunting. Fact 21. In 1977, amateur inventor Michael Dacre became fascinated by the idea of building a homemade rocket-powered vehicle capable of astonishing speeds across an empty desert road. Inspired by professional land speed records, he spent months constructing the machine in his own workshop, convinced careful planning would compensate for limited engineering experience. Friends admired his enthusiasm but questioned whether the improvised steering system had been adequately tested at high speed. During the first full-power trial, the rocket accelerated far faster than expected. Almost immediately, the vehicle became unstable, drifting violently off course before Dacre could regain control. The impact destroyed the experimental craft and proved fatal. Investigators later concluded that the propulsion system functioned almost exactly as intended. The failure came from underestimating how difficult controlling extreme speed could become. Sometimes generating enormous power is remarkably easy, compared with surviving the consequences of successfully unleashing it. Fact 22. In 1961, respected physicist Louis Slotin's earlier nuclear research had already demonstrated how unforgiving radioactive materials could be, yet dangerous hands-on demonstrations remained common during that era. Other scientists continued using techniques that relied heavily on personal precision rather than modern safety equipment. During one such experiment involving criticality testing, a tiny mistake allowed two pieces of reflective material surrounding a plutonium core to move closer together than intended. The reaction intensified almost instantly, releasing a devastating burst of radiation before the setup could be separated. Although everyone nearby survived the initial flash, the lead researcher absorbed a lethal dose while attempting to stop the reaction. His final actions likely prevented an even larger disaster affecting colleagues standing around him. The accident permanently transformed laboratory safety standards, illustrating with heartbreaking clarity that confidence and intelligence offer no protection against the unforgiving laws of nuclear physics. Fact 23. In 1988, experienced hunter David Grundy believed he had found the perfect elevated position while tracking game through dense woodland. Spotting what appeared to be a sturdy dead tree with an excellent view of the surrounding valley, he climbed higher until reaching a comfortable perch. Unknown to him, years of internal decay had hollowed out much of the trunk despite its solid appearance from the outside. As he shifted his weight to adjust his position, the weakened tree suddenly split apart beneath him. The collapse happened so quickly that there was no opportunity to climb down or jump clear. He fell alongside the breaking trunk, suffering fatal injuries before companions could reach him. Forestry experts later explained that dead trees often remain standing for years while becoming dangerously unstable inside. In the wilderness, the greatest threat is sometimes not the animal you're searching for, but the tree supporting your confidence. Fact 24. In 1992, seasoned amateur pilot Douglas Corrigan enjoyed restoring vintage aircraft and frequently flew older models that required considerably more manual attention than modern airplanes. Before one routine flight, mechanics recommended replacing a worn fuel selector component, but Corrigan believed it could safely last a little longer because it had shown only minor signs of wear. Shortly after takeoff, the aging valve unexpectedly failed, interrupting fuel flow to the engine at a critically low altitude. Although he attempted an emergency landing, there was simply not enough height or time to recover before the aircraft struck the ground. Investigators determined the airplane itself had been well maintained overall, making the overlooked component all the more tragic. The accident reinforced one of aviation's oldest lessons. Disasters rarely begin with dramatic failures. More often, they start with a tiny mechanical problem that seems perfectly reasonable to postpone until after just one more flight. Fact 25. In 1997, experienced outdoorsman Timothy Treadwell believed years of living among Alaska's grizzly bears had allowed him to understand their behavior better than most wildlife experts. He spent 13 summers camping remarkably close to animals that many biologists considered unpredictable apex predators. Treadwell frequently filmed himself speaking to the bears, insisting mutual trust had replaced fear. Late in the season, however, food had become scarce, and several unfamiliar bears remained active instead of entering hibernation. One particularly aggressive male wandered into his campsite, while Treadwell and his companion were inside their tent. The encounter turned fatal before help could arrive. Wildlife investigators later concluded the attack reflected normal bear behavior rather than unusual aggression. The heartbreaking story remains one of history's clearest reminders that admiration for wild animals should never be confused with domestication, because nature does not recognize good intentions or emotional attachment. Fact 26. In 1998, British television presenter Michael Lush volunteered for a live charity stunt that appeared dangerous but manageable after extensive planning. The challenge required him to be secured by an elastic cord while hanging beneath a helicopter before making a controlled jump. Engineers had calculated every measurement, and rehearsals suggested the event could be completed safely. During the final preparations, however, one critical miscalculation involving the cord's length went unnoticed. When Lush released himself, the line failed to extend as intended, leaving almost no margin for error. He struck the ground with devastating force before emergency personnel could intervene. The investigation that followed exposed a chain of preventable planning mistakes rather than a single catastrophic failure. His death profoundly changed safety procedures for televised stunts across Britain, proving that spectacular entertainment often depends upon tiny mathematical details remaining absolutely perfect from beginning to end. Fact 27. In 1989, experienced photographer Dieter Plages traveled across Africa, documenting wildlife from remarkably close distances. Known for capturing breathtaking images, he often relied on patience instead of barriers, believing calm behavior allowed animals to ignore his presence. While photographing a herd of elephants in Zambia, Plages focused intensely on composing the perfect shot through his camera lens. Witnesses later explained that one elephant quietly became agitated after detecting movement too close to several younger animals. Looking through a telephoto lens dramatically narrowed Plages' field of vision, preventing him from recognizing the warning signs unfolding just outside the frame. The elephant charged with astonishing speed, leaving virtually no opportunity to escape. Colleagues later reflected that the same dedication responsible for his extraordinary photographs also contributed to his final mistake. Sometimes chasing the perfect image means noticing everything except the danger approaching from the edges. Fact 28. In 1925, Scottish physician Alexander Bogdanov was not the only scientist convinced self-experimentation could accelerate medical progress. Throughout the early 20th century, many respected researchers willingly tested bold theories on themselves before involving other volunteers. One chemist became fascinated with the effects of newly synthesized industrial gases, believing small exposures would provide valuable scientific observations. Confident that careful measurements reduced the risk, he repeatedly inhaled substances whose long-term toxicity remained poorly understood. During one experiment, the concentration proved far greater than anticipated, rapidly overwhelming his respiratory system before assistants fully recognized the severity of the exposure. Despite immediate efforts to save him, he died from the effects of the poisonous gas. His tragic end reinforced an important lesson that modern laboratories still emphasize today. Scientific curiosity has produced remarkable discoveries, but curiosity alone has never been an effective substitute for comprehensive safety testing. Fact 29. In 1999, veteran storm chaser Carl Jung had spent years pursuing tornadoes, thunderstorms, and violent weather systems across the American Midwest. His experience convinced him he understood exactly how close he could safely approach developing storms without placing himself in serious danger. During one particularly active afternoon, Jung parked beside what appeared to be a weakening tornado while recording dramatic footage from outside his vehicle. Within moments, the storm unexpectedly changed direction and intensified, producing powerful winds far beyond what he anticipated. Flying debris struck with tremendous force, leaving almost no chance to escape before the tornado overtook his position. Investigators later noted that tornadoes frequently alter speed and direction with little warning, even confusing seasoned meteorologists. The storm did not behave irrationally. It simply reminded everyone that experience may improve judgment, but nature always reserves the right to rewrite every prediction without asking permission. Fact 30. In 1978, Australian amateur pilot Frederick Valentich set out on what was supposed to be a routine training flight over Bass Strait. While his disappearance later became surrounded by UFO speculation, investigators focused on a far more likely explanation rooted in human error. During the flight, Valentich repeatedly reported seeing an unidentified object circling above him. Aviation experts later suggested he may have been observing the reflection of his own aircraft lights, or even the bright planet Venus, while gradually becoming disoriented over open water. Believing something mysterious was following him, he likely failed to recognize that his aircraft itself had entered an increasingly dangerous attitude. Without a visible horizon, spatial disorientation can fool even experienced pilots into trusting sensations instead of instruments. Moments later, radio contact ended forever. The tragedy became a textbook reminder that the human brain can become dangerously convincing when deprived of reliable visual references. Fact 31. In 1991, accomplished cave diver Sheck Exley attempted to push beyond previous depth records inside one of Mexico's deepest underwater cave systems. Exley had completed thousands of dives and was widely regarded as one of the greatest cave divers in history. His experience inspired enormous confidence, but it also encouraged him to explore environments where even the smallest error offered virtually no chance of survival. During the record attempt, he descended far deeper than recreational diving limits, entering a region where extreme pressure dramatically affected breathing gases and decision-making. Investigators believe a combination of nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, and overwhelming physical stress likely impaired his judgment before he could begin ascending. His body was recovered days later by another elite diver. Exley's death profoundly affected the diving community because it demonstrated that extraordinary expertise does not eliminate risk when exploring environments operating beyond normal human limits. Fact 32. In 1982, experienced volcanologist David Johnston stood at an observation post several miles from Mount St. Helens, carefully monitoring the increasingly unstable volcano. Scientists believed the chosen location provided a reasonable safety margin while allowing valuable observations of the mountain's activity. Johnston remained calm throughout the morning, regularly transmitting updates as pressure continued building beneath the volcano. Then, without warning, the entire north face of the mountain collapsed in the largest landslide ever recorded, releasing a massive lateral blast that traveled sideways instead of upward, as many experts had expected. Johnston's famous final radio transmission, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," captured the terrifying realization that the eruption was moving directly toward him. The blast reached his observation post within seconds, leaving no possibility of escape. His death permanently reshaped volcanic hazard planning by proving that nature often ignores even the most carefully calculated safety zones. Fact 33. In 1996, veteran Everest guide Scott Fisher had spent years leading climbers safely to the world's highest summit, earning a reputation for remarkable strength and confidence at extreme altitude. During the disastrous climbing season that inspired countless books and documentaries, Fisher continued upward despite growing exhaustion, worsening weather, and dangerous delays affecting multiple expeditions. Like many elite climbers, he believed experience and determination could overcome deteriorating conditions that had defeated less accomplished mountaineers. Unfortunately, Everest rewards confidence only until the mountain decides otherwise. As the team descended, a powerful storm reduced visibility, temperatures plummeted, and oxygen supplies dwindled. Fisher became trapped high above the safety of lower camps, too weak to continue despite repeated rescue attempts. His death became one of the defining tragedies of modern mountaineering, reminding the world that on Everest, even legends remain temporary visitors beneath forces far greater than themselves. Which death was the dumbest mistake? Tell us your pick in the comments.